received following the first Myth Salon about the Splendor Solis, I was stunned by the amount of attention drawn to the video that came out of this. Within a week, we had over 200 viewings. We had 300 people registered. We have a couple hundred today. I think it really says something about the sustained magnetic pull of an alchemical document that came about at the time of the shift from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. And this was really, this was a phenomenal shift. This was something that really grabbed European culture and kind of wrested it into a completely new grip of time. 11 days just went in one weekend. It's like daylight savings time, except it was 11 days. So I'm struck today again by how we are in a world of polarized thought, where there are so many competing functions and attentions to specific issues. And related to the coronavirus, I would like all of our thoughts to go to my good friend and partner in this, Will Lin, who actually has experienced and is now going through COVID. And he maybe will elaborate and tell us a little bit about it. He's got reduced energy, which anything other than his normal exuberance would be reduced. But, you know, let's give a moment to what conditions we are faced with and are surrounded with, and then we'll get into the Splendor Solis. So if we can, let's just have a quick moment. So, as I do, I'd like to open up today with a short poem, or it's actually one of the verses of the Nature and Wisdom of the Tao Te Ching. This is verse 71. To comprehend the incomprehensible, to approach the unapproachable armed only with innocence, not knowing brings forth worlds without fences or divisions, awakening journeys that go anywhere. Not knowing is the highest form of intelligence. With not knowing, for one who is wise, the horizons are boundless. Knowledge of one's ignorance is true strength. Without truly knowing one's own ignorance, no matter how much knowledge, one never becomes wise. Distance from the Tao is a kind of a disease. It comes from ingesting the fruits of knowledge and becoming part of the world. Illusions of separation and power seduce people into believing the world has no limits, that it can be exhausted. A tragic misunderstanding. For only the Tao is without limit. All the Tao's manifestations come and go in patterns of endless impermanence, recognition, and form. Cages adorned with self-adulation. People see changes and imagine existence as a perpetually renewable resource, a commodity for use, something to own, something to serve humanity. They think in the languages of productivity and resources, that the manifestations will never run out. A tragic miscalculation, for only the Tao endures. So Welcome, everyone. Let's go to Will. Will, if you would take a moment and give us an introduction, please, to who's here to serve as our panel. And then we'll turn it over to Dyane, and we'll go into part 2 of the Splendor Solis. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks for the well wishes. And if there's anything I can say from my experience about all this thing is I can't imagine what I'd be like if I hadn't been vaccinated before I got sick. Gosh, I was really sick. I'm still, pretty tired and can't smell, put my nose straight in the coffee beans or right over the whiskey bottle, and there's nothing. So, gosh, it's easy to feel like it's almost over and gone and all that stuff. We're all, many of us are double vaccinated, and I guess it's out of expected the unexpected as soon as I started to let it be unexpected. But thanks for the well wishes, and I'm sure I'll be fine tonight, and I'm feeling a lot better. So y'all know me. My name is Will Lynn, founder of Myth House in the General Education Department at Hushing College, where I teach myth to filmmakers and performing artists. Since we have a few less of us tonight, I might give Dana's slightly longer bio. Dana is a Renaissance educator, producer, designer, athlete, environmental activist, and adventurer. Edits designs and produces books under the Copper Cauldron publishing imprint, which I hope you guys will check out. In 2016, he co-founded the Myth Salon, where once or twice a month, we arrange for scholars, educators, psychologists, mythologists, and more to meet in this salon setting. Dennis Patrick Slattery is Distinguished Emeritus Professor in the Mythological Studies program at Pacifica Graduate Institute. He is the author, co-author, editor, or co-editor of 30 volumes, including 7 volumes of poetry and 1 novel. His latest collection of essays is The Way of Myth, Stories, Subtle Wisdom. His paintings, pottery, blogs, and book titles, as well as upcoming events, can be found at DennisPatrickSlattery.com. We're here with Sophie Dufresne tonight, who's an independent artist that we met through the certificate program in Jungian Studies at the LA Jung Institute. She brings to her artistic approach a healthy spirit of scientific curiosity and playful logic, coupled with rigorous research she inherited from her studies in engineering and mathematics at Montreal Polytechnic and Virginia Tech. You can find more of her work at sophiekey.com, which we'll share in the chat. And we're also here tonight for part 2 with Dyane Sherwood, a very special part 2, which we never do, but it just seemed like the right thing in the middle of the evening. Dyane, as we mentioned last week, collaborated with the late Joseph L. Henderson on a book relating to the images of the Splendor Solis, the process of transformation and analysis. Dr. Henderson had his personal analysis with C.G. Jung and was the only American contributor to Jung's remarkable book, Man and His Symbols. Dr. Sherwood is a Jungian psychoanalyst, a sandplay therapist, and author. She founded the Analytical Psychology Press. Thank you for being with us, Dyane.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Dana, I loved what you read, and I wonder if you could if you still have the book in front of you, if you could read the 2 lines about not being far from the Tao. Oh, you're on mute.
Distance from the Tao is a kind of a disease. It comes from ingesting the fruits of knowledge and becoming part of the world.
That's perfect, because that really describes part of the theme that I'm bringing out. And the Tao is something that we didn't have in the West, that kind of back and forth and rebalancing, and of the idea of something dynamic, that and energies is such an important contribution that we've received from the East. So maybe we can keep that in mind. Okay, I want to, for those of you who weren't, are there people who weren't here last time?
I'm sure there'll be some, but I imagine that most probably were here.
Okay, well, I'll just then give a little bit of an introduction. that these, what I'll be talking about are images from a very special illuminated manuscript that's dated 1582, and it's it's one of the treasures of the British Library. It's the most beautiful alchemical manuscript, at least European alchemical manuscript that I know of. And you know, it's amazing how, I think Dana and I were talking last night, and I knew I wasn't the attraction here, because people wouldn't be all signed, that many people wouldn't be signing up to hear me, I don't think. But the Splendor Solis has its own magic, the beauty of it. And with the internet, so many people have seen it, and it's in so many places. Now, when Joseph Henderson and I were writing the book, this wasn't on the internet at all. The British Library took the first digital pictures for me. They had just gotten their first big format digital camera, if you can believe. And I asked if they could possibly take the pictures, and they said, this will be the first thing we do. We'll do it for you right now, right away, because I'd gone there to study the manuscript. And when I saw it in person, and I had a magnifying glass with me, because there's some things that are so small in these that they're done with single hairs. And so you have to look at it with a magnifying glass. And I was amazed at how much more I could see. And then having the digital images and being able to blow them up on my computer was incredible. And it was clear a lot more work had to be done when we saw that. So now it's everywhere. And when I taught in San Francisco in June, I slipped out there before Delta. The person sponsoring this made mugs with Splendor Solis images for everybody. So it was kind of amazing what a time we live in. But it was so synchronistic that just at the time we were working on this book, we were able to get these digital images rather than having to use photographic images and a photographic process to print the book. So it was like the old and the new were coming together in an amazing way. So I think people have seen this and seem to be so drawn to the beauty of it and the mystery of it. And alchemical symbolism is so complex and deep, and this work is so sophisticated that you can spend a lot of time weaving in and out of the different connections and different possible meanings of things, and it just becomes fascinating. What I've talked about last time, and I'll be talking about this time, are actually things that are quite obvious, and that I think that you will hearing this will be able to see it with your own eyes, and just rather than something that's totally esoteric and depends on a lot of interpretation. So I want to show you a couple things that from last time that came up, and then I'm going to go to the fourth image in the Splendor Solis, which I already talked about at some length, and continue to talk about that a little bit more. Okay. All right, so I'm going to do screen share if I can. Let's see, share screen. Okay. And now I'm going to put the slideshow on. Okay. Last time we, oops, I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, hold on. Pause. Okay. All right. Can this image came up, and it was mentioned that this bird was an ibis, And I just thought I'd say a little more about it, because the ibis was closely associated with alchemy. There were a lot of ibises at the temple that the Greeks called the Temple of Hermopolis in Egypt. And there was water there and a lot of little insects that really bothered people. And the ibises would all be at the water, and they eat all these little insects and things that bothered them. And so they were really loved for that. And they're also very beautiful. So here's some photographs of there are many versions of ibises, but these are really quite stunning and strange birds. Sometimes people see a bird with a curved beak in an alchemical image. And I think it's important to pay attention as to whether or not you're looking at an eagle, which we might assume a fairly crudely drawn bird would be, or whether it's an ibis that's associated with alchemy. And people thought that their bodies were kind of heart-shaped if you look at them straight on. And here you see this is an outline that I made from an Egyptian frieze copy of that. And this is a copy from the museum in Montreal that I have of an Egyptian carving of an ibis. Okay. So we were looking at this fourth painting, and as you'll recall, it's a very common alchemical theme of the meeting of the king and queen. And this, though, is unusual for its very sophisticated depiction of the facial expressions and body language of the king and queen, and certain features. You'll see on the right the more famous woodblock print of the Rosarium Philosophorum. And that you see the king is standing on the sun and the queen is standing on the moon. And that's really quite typical. In the Splendor Solis version, the king has his feet on fiery something in the fire and looks kind of anxious. And we have the sun and a moon above. So we have the above and the below. And then these archetypal figures, these figures that represent something that's beyond a regular human being, but something that by their being a king and queen, they represent, from a Jungian point of view, perhaps the self or a larger personality. But in any case, they're representative of some kind of ruling principle or ruling aspect of life and the psyche. Now, I called your attention last time to the fact that the moon is shining by her own light in the sky. And I remember the tone of Dr. Henderson's voice when he one time just pointed that out to me, just kind of marveling at it and saying, the moon has her own light here, as if it were just a whole change in consciousness. And in the chat last time, somebody suggested, well, everybody at that time thought the moon had her own light, but that actually wasn't the case. I'm sure there are people now who think that too, but actually in 486 before the Common Era, Anaxagoras was studying the phases of the moon, and he said that it was light reflected by the sun. And Leonardo da Vinci studied it a lot, well before the time of the Splendor Solis. And he was trying to figure out why the moon reflected the light of the sun. And he thought it must be covered with water and that it formed a kind of complex mirror. But I think the representation here is not what the way we're used to thinking of a scientific kind of thing, like does it really have its own light or does it not? Normally in these paintings, the moon is represented as a crescent moon, but here the moon is full and whole. And this belies the idea that that wholeness must involve ultimately the achievement of a solar consciousness. I think that's a one-sided interpretation that this particular image is actually challenging. Here they're equal partners. And in fact, she's a little larger and higher up than he is, which I think is kind of compensatory. And so the idea that a feminine principle, but more than feminine, a lunar principle, is what if it were co-equal with the kind of the bright light of the sun, the solar consciousness that shines the bright light on everything. Paracelsus wrote a great deal about the night being the time of healing. And he particularly embraced this kind of lunar consciousness as being absolutely the essence of the art of alchemy, and particularly the art of healing of human illnesses and the human being out of the Tao, out of balance. I also want to remind you that in the second painting, we saw that the alchemists went out symbolically, went out into nature to leave behind think about the constructed world that he was in, and think about leaving behind the dogma, the constructions of your own mind. And this fits, Dana, your choice of reading is so perfect, because it's like letting go of all of those presuppositions and really focusing on discovering the nature of things. It's not easy. But in this too, we see that when the alchemist does this, there's this hint that these deer are kind of looking up into this other reality. And of course, we see very cleverly depicted multiple levels of, and not just levels, but multiple realities relating to each other within these paintings. And so we see the deer seem to be looking up, as if nature, these beings in nature, are becoming aware that the human being is doing something different. And I think that if any of you have had synchronistic experiences with nature, you know what I'm talking about. We see some of them in Jung's writing, where a particular animal comes in to a room, or I've had experiences talking to people, and they've had a dream, and then that animal shows up, flies by their window if they're on Zoom. And I've certainly had some experiences like that, that came where animals appeared most unexpectedly, and that I'd never seen before for years in the area where I was walking. There was one time when I was doing a walk in the hills behind Stanford, and that I did practically every day when I lived there. And I was making this really life-changing, difficult decision, and a golden eagle swooped down right across my path. I'd never seen one there before. And there are different things going on and different realities going on all the time. And I would have thought I was hallucinating or something, except a jogger came around the curve the other way and he said, "Did you see that golden eagle?" And I was like, yeah, I was just amazed. So here we have that happening. And things, if you pay attention, those things from nature may come just when you need them. Okay, so I wanted to show you what they're standing on because I think it's important. And I made the slide, so that I could compare it to what they're standing on in the rosarium. Now, hold on just a moment here. I'm going to have to just pause this so I can see my notes, and I'll be right back with you. Okay. Actually, what I'll do is I'll stop now. Dana and I talked about stopping and letting people jump in and have a conversation. So maybe before I go on to this next point, would be a good time to stop and have some discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Sophie.
I just had a little remark regarding what they're standing on. That the king might be standing on that what represents the hot and dry, and the queen the wet and cold, because that's very important in alchemy.
Yeah, people have suggested that, and I think that really makes sense. I'm going to talk more about it, but I thought I'd pause before I got into that.
Well,
but I like that.
Looking back at some of the
yeah.
stuff you're talking about before that, before we turn into that direction, you're talking about the moon is bigger than the sun, and
Yeah.
thinking about the moon as whole in and of itself. And when I see an image of the moon bigger than the sun, what the syntax for me is reality is much about reflection as it is about existence. Is the purpose of existence, maybe even is the reflection on existence even perhaps more important than what it's really all about?
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Hey, Zaman, thanks for joining us. You guys know Zaman teaches Islamic mythologies and is a Fulbright scholar, political ideologist, and has taught us about what's going on in the Middle East many times, and also about Rumi. So thanks for joining us, Zaman.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to be in this wonderful panel.
Anybody else have a comment?
Dyane, one of the things that I read was that the fire that the sun is standing on, that the king is standing on, seems to have almost like a little face in the bottom of it.
Yeah.
As if it's alive, as if this fire that fuels the sun's presence has a soul of its own, and that the king is engaging that presence as a way of identifying who he is in relation to the queen and the lunar aspect.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes. It seems to be very primal, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That it's like getting down to something very primal, and he's standing there in the fire. He's like tall. He's suffering it. He's not running away from it.
Can I jump in there?
Sorry?
Okay, I was just wondering if I could jump in there.
Oh.
I think the moon having its own light probably ties up closely with the concept of the layl, which is the night. The sun is the masculine, the moon is the feminine, but it's the feminine that gives birth to everything. It's from that layl, from the darkness, and I'm sure you understand it better that some of the earliest symbols in Egyptian mythology is the color black is in there, that represents the night. And I think also when it comes over to the Islamic mythologies, there too, the highest attribute of God is the essence of God, and the Arabic word is Dhat. and the highest attribute of God is feminine. Other attributes are masculine, but the highest one is feminine because it's the feminine that's the birthing, the nurturing, the creating one. That ties with the concept of Lail, I think, which may then go over to the idea of the first woman, Lilith, that according to some, and I must underline that some part, is that the one who rebelled against the perhaps the masculine order, and has been disenfranchised. But I think I think the moon giving the light, for the light and the Layl and the night and all that, they weave together. And also in Islamic culture, the most popular feminine character in the most romantic story is that of the Layli and Majnun. And Layli is that same Layl, which comes from the word night, and it is one of the most popular feminine names.
Yeah, I would add to what Zaman said. In the morning at 4:30, I always step outside here in the Texas Hill Country and look for the moon. And it was a few mornings ago that when I stepped out, she was looking right at me and smiling in her face. And on each side of her and down just a bit were two stars. And I thought, this is magnificent. She has an escort in the sky with these two stars accompanying her. So when I'm listening to all of you and looking at that image of the sun and the moon, there's something mysterious for me and marvelous that we're seeing the moon in one of her phases, but she has so many. And one of the delights of when we have clear skies here in Texas, which is most often, it's such a treat to continue to go out each morning and see what phase she's developing, so that there's something so organic about that, yeah, I wanted to share that observation.
I hear the awe in that experience and the joy. It's one of those moments where one feels most fully alive.
Yes. And just a final thing, even while she was in one of her lesser phases, the light was so brilliant, I could have walked up and down the street just with the sunlight. I beg your pardon, just with the moonlight.
Yeah. Oh, that you must not live around too much ambient light then.
No, we're very fortunate. When it's dark here, it's dark, especially without any of the moon's phases. Yeah.
Wow.
Dyane, you know, when I was working with the Splendor Solis for your now second talk, I came across the Avicenna's in the Splendor Solis by Trismosan, that it has Avicenna's 7 rules for the Philosopher's Stone. And it seems to me that if we were really looking at it in context, that there would have been a real relationship between European alchemy and Islamic alchemy, that this would have made its way. We know that, for example, Aristotle's writings were preserved having gone into the Middle East, and then they came up through Spain. And we owe a deep debt of gratitude to the Muslim culture, to the Islamic world for it. Very possibly we really owe a deep debt of gratitude to them for how it influenced our understanding of alchemy that came from them. Zaman, is there anything to that, or should I just cut this out of the video?
Well, I think the word chemia or alchemia, which eventually became alchemy and the chemistry and all that, I think that is the connecting point there, because the idea is that there is a set of belief that the word Kim was probably part of the root of the name for Egypt. That when in many of these stories, that biblical and Quranic stories, the reason that Joseph and Moses and almost everyone tries to go to Egypt, it's aside from all the other interesting points that there are in those narratives, one of the ideas that they have to cleanse themselves. Like the very name Moses is from the water, and the water is the key element in that process of purification and cleansing. And so when you look at it more symbolically, aside from the scriptural significance of them, is that these people were going to chemistry, to Egypt, to purify themselves, to cleanse themselves, to elevate themselves to a higher level. And the idea was that most of us are probably iron or copper, and in order for that to become gold, you have to go through the process. And I think that would be I don't know if I can call it non-scriptural interpretation, but perhaps something like that. That the very name stands for cleansing and for purification.
Yeah, I think really European alchemy is derived from Islamic alchemy, but and in the kind of apocryphal biography of the so-called author of the Splendor Solis, he talks about working in a laboratory of a nobleman in Venice, and a lot of manuscripts, there was a lot of trade between Constantinople and Venice, and a lot of materials came through that way, as well as through Sicily. But the Europeans were so far behind the Islamic world, which was very sophisticated and far more advanced than Europe was at the time of contact. And a lot of things that Europe got an enormous amount of things from the Islamic world. But because of the religious persecution from the Catholic Church, there wasn't I think it hasn't been acknowledged adequately. There's a way of, it's easy to forget the tremendous contributions to civilization that a culture has made if you kind of decide they're other and don't appreciate them. So, and I'll bring that up in a minute. So maybe I'll go on now, unless somebody.
Yeah, Dyane, I wonder if I can just introduce Boris,
Yeah.
who's back with us. Hey, Boris. Boris Matthews, PhD, LCSW, graduated from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago and maintains a practice of analytical psychology in Milwaukee and Madison, Wisconsin. He serves as the director of training of the analyst training program and regularly teaches classes for analytic candidates and conducts study groups in Madison, as well as by video conference. Thanks for being with us, Boris.
Glad to be here. I apologize for getting here late, folks.
Good to see
Thanks
you.
for the nice introduction.
Yeah, Dyane, please take us back into the burning feet.
Let's go back and see what they're standing on. Look a little more with that. Okay. Okay, let me see. I'm going to pause this for a minute. Oops. Okay. Now, do you see my presenter's notes? I don't know how this is working.
Yes, your presenter's notes are visible.
We do,
Do.
unless you're using, are you using two screens at a time?
I was, but then I had some trouble with that, so I'm just using one. Would
You
it
know,
be
I
better
don't
if I were using two?
Well, if you use two, then you can split the presenter notes to one and one to the other. But if it's giving you a hard time, I think that's okay. And I don't think any of us mind seeing your notes.
Okay. Okay, if it doesn't mess up your video, it's okay with me.
Dana, what do you think? I think it's too tough if you're planning on notes, to not have your notes. I've been there.
Yeah. Why don't you guys talk a little bit and I'll fix this. It'll take me just a second to plug it, to
sure.
fix it. Okay. Then you can edit it out or whatever.
Well, remind what you're talking about the stuff with alchemy. One thing that came up, I was thinking about with Zaman here is I had a dream some years ago where out of absolutely nowhere, I had a dream with the quote, brothers of Basra, and I didn't know what Basra was. I wrote to Zaman, I'm like, what's going on in Basra? And it was all connected to the Pythagoreans in my dream. And one of the things I found is that, it's not just that we, retrieve so much from the Middle East and from the Islamic tradition. It's that we often also miss how much that tradition was inspired and informed by Greeks, by Plato, and we are talking about Aristotle as well, and Pythagoras. Pythagoras is one of my favorite figures when we're making sense of fire and making sense of all these alchemical symbols. Anyway, just a fond memory I had of a dream.
Yeah.
Looking at, yeah. There it is. You got it.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for your patience, everybody. Let's see here. Go to slide I want. Great. So I wanted to tell you about Jung, referring to this image. He talked about it in his essay on individual dream symbolism in relation to alchemy. And according to Jung, the king is standing on fire and the queen is standing on the earth. And, that fits so well with what Sophie said, because the element fire is hot and dry, and earth was thought to have the qualities of being cool and wet. And he brought up this image in relation to a dream that he was discussing. And he said, the globe is rather an image of the earth, upon which the anima, he refers to the queen as the anima of his patient, as if it were of his patient, stands worshiping the sun. Anima and sun are thus distinct. The latter is a personification of the unconscious, while the sun is a symbol of the source of life and the ultimate wholeness of man. And so I thought this is interesting, especially in terms of his seeing the sun as the source of life. And we just heard that the feminine was the source of life. So this is very interesting. Now, there was someone commented last time about how with the instability of things in the world right now, that the moon being inconstant and changeable, that there's a kind of discomfort and that people are looking for steadiness. But I think here we see that what's the cultural feminine, because of course we know that it's so much is culturally determined as well as biologically. So here we see the reverse. The queen is comfortably standing on the solid earth. And that if you look at her, she's got a black slipper and a red one or shoe, the black being the beginning of the process in terms of color symbolism, and the red being the end of the process. There's these symbols all over the place. But here she is, she's standing on the earth. And I think and she's balanced, she's comfortably balanced on the earth. And so I think that shows a great steadiness on her part, and that it symbolizes that this feminine principle has at its base not something that is changeable so much as a connection to the earth, to body, to matter. And I don't mean the matter of materialism, I mean matter that is full of energy and spirit. So now, we might find this easier to understand if we just keep reminding ourselves that in Jungian theory, the king and queen represents opposites that are not ego identified. So we don't when we're looking at the king and queen, we're not really talking so much about men and women as we're talking about the feminine and masculine in men and the feminine and masculine in women. And it's very hard for us to tease those apart for very long, but we might try to keep that in mind. And part of this is that it's because the king and queen are symbolizing something that shouldn't be part of our ego identity. It's something about a larger personality, the larger self that transcends the ego. I think I already talked to you about how the king and queen meeting in nature means that they cannot rely on their formal habitual ways of acting, on their personas. And then we can ask, might their genuine natures or emotions emerge? Here we might think of the process and analysis by which the identification with an archetype or a persona gives way to becoming more human and uniquely individual. Now, last time I showed you this, I talked a little bit about how much the alchemy depended on Islamic sources, and how much I see some of the Islamic contributions as being much more differentiated, subtle, and truly related. And this is a 15th century illustration of Zosimos and Theosebia. And they're conversing, they're working together and trying to understand things. And they look so much more comfortable and engaged than that king and queen that we saw last time. And I also showed you this picture that I think is just so beautiful. And I think you can see that there's writing. It's in Persian. And so because I had this second time and a little more time, I wanted to tell you about the poem that goes with it that I think captures some of the mystery, because it's symbolic poetry and is written. It's by a very famous poet, Nizami, from the 12th century. And he really, it was one of those geniuses who brings together, his mother was Kurdish, and he brought together and refined and developed Persian literature at that time. And we have an analyst. I was in San Francisco till relatively recently, and Stephen Dariush Nouriani is of Iranian descent and was born in Iran and speaks, among other languages, has quite a few, speaks and reads Persian. And so I asked him if he could translate what was on this page for me. And here's the translation he made, so you can see the mystery of things. The lady, wise and enlightened in the ways of the work, appeared as she answered our deepest longing. It was the most beautiful scene of water and colors. As she was seated in a majestic tower, built and decorated with minuscule stones, she emerged as a beautiful bride, as though the full moon had just appeared on a dark black night. Now that seems to be referring to what was just said about the dark, the black, and then the moon, the light of the moon. She blossomed like the narcissus, mesmerizing, full of essence and fragrance. Her pure love emanated from the brilliant white light of her jet black hair. So there's that echo of the moon at night. Her long black locks draped on each side, sacred as a cross, glinting as though the moon were caught by her hands. Then she speaks to them and she says, to those who gaze at my hair or even fix themselves on my eyebrows, she says, I am most visible when I am hidden. You can sense the wisdom in my devotion. You cannot judge or determine my nature, as your tongue will trick you the moment you try to speak of me. Okay, I'm going to stop again before I go on to just review what was on those bas-reliefs, which I'll do quickly, and see if anybody wants to jump in or whether I should go on.
Well, I think a lot about some other images of women standing on moons, right? We always see Mary standing on a crescent moon, or often. And we also often see Isis with the horns and the baby in her arms, or we see Inanna, the little crescent moon above Inanna's head when she's at the bottom of the underworld. And I think that little crescent being associated with the feminine is, and also what you said, the matter of energy and spirit, not just dead matter, you know? So that idea that like there's this kind of wellspring of energy in the feminine that comes out of the smallest crescent of moon, that moment when it's all out, it's all dark, but from which the first crescent will come and it will just keep growing from the darkness. But it all grows out of that darkness. And anyway, I just wanted to amplify a couple other images that make me think similar things with Inanna and Isis and Mary.
Yeah, great. And it echoes back to Dennis's experience of it.
I'm quite impressed with the poem itself, especially toward the end. And I'd have to hear it or read it again. But she seems to imply that you, the viewer, or you who seek me, can find me most fully when you cannot use your physical eyes. You cannot use the senses that are so bound to daylight. You have to find your way, if it will, as it were, intuitively. It's a bad word, intuitive, but it's factoring out the visible senses. I'm reminded of Tagore's little drama, The King of the Dark Chamber, if you know that, which is a beautiful story. Yeah.
I think there's also the element of the crescent moon at the top of most Muslim architecture. And some people have been questioning, like, why is the moon a symbol of Islam? Yes, the fact that they are, I don't know, solely, that's spelled correctly, relying on the moon, is that the word for God, Allah, and the word for the crescent moon, Hilal, are spelled with exactly the same letters. So when you shuffle them, you get Allah, and you reshuffle them and you get Hilal. And so that is kind of encoded in there. But also I want to comment on what Will was saying earlier about the dream on Basra. Basra, the word comes from Basar, which is the vision, the inner sight. Of course, it's the city in southern Iraq, and coincidentally, I had a dream like that too. So I wrote a poem. It's titled "Basra Has No Tears." This was right before the American invasion back in 2003. But I think when you look at it geographically, a lot of these cultures that we refer to today, they are not where they were many, many years ago. So for instance, Iran or Persia used to be in Iraq, and Greece used to be much closer to it because that's why they were neighboring rivals fighting one another. And then the Greeks got pushed westward, first by the Persians, later by the Turks, and they ended up somewhere in Europe, but they probably originally were not European, I mean, culture, when you kind of separate the culture from the geography. So if you place them where they were, then they would have been much closer to Egypt in terms of that other connection with the alchemical. So there.
I've continued with my attempts at active imagination with all 22 of these, and I've just gone back through them and back through them. And I want to just share with all of you just a few things that have come up, and they're not out of me. They're out of some relationship that I'm trying to cultivate with these images. So here's a few. As I gaze on each of the paintings, they ask of me, which is your way of being with us? What do you seek when you visit each of us? If it helps you, then bring your way to our way, and we can explore where our stories meet and where they diverge. And just one more. We can know you by our being known. And again, these aren't rationally concocted. I just sat with the images, and this is the language that they're offering me to grasp something of them as perhaps I grasp something of me through them. So it's just been it's been just a very rich, that's why I didn't dare miss tonight, because I knew that I would get more sensibility about it, about this actively engaging with them without trying to control them. Yeah.
Well, I think you're modeling what is really the quality of consciousness and differentiated relating that I'm talking about in these two lectures. It's not the only thing that's in this manuscript by any means, but it's the part you've put it so poetically that, and because that openness to the other, to relationship, and you're relating to these images as if they are alive, and they are. There's something about them. They really have a life, I think.
Very
I
much
feel.
so. And I'll just say the last thing, because I wrote this to myself before we started tonight. These paintings are not objects to my being subject. They are subjects in their own right. And if I can meet them on a subject to subject level, I think something will be revealed. It's an act of faith.
You're a real mystic. It's wonderful. I think things are already being revealed.
Well, I just want to connect what you're saying to that, and maybe it's in the air and obvious to the poem. It was already being read, where she's known best, where she's not seen, where it's not being objectified, where you're not looking for something to see out there,
Yeah.
And I think about that crescent moon at the top. And there's another story I think about a lot where we have where in the poem, it's the woman with the shining hair atop the tower, the white shining hair atop the tower. Well, there's a woman named Satanaya, and she's from the Caucasus Mountains, and she is at the top of a tower, and she shines, and she has either holds her pinky out the window or holds her crooked elbow out the window, and then her husband, Warzameg, is crossing the abyss, which is the abyss that the dark moon goes over and then goes out on, right? And so he's crossing the abyss, and then she pulls back her pinky or she pulls back her elbow, and that little crescent moon goes dark. And in that moment of darkness, he falls in the abyss. She feels like, oh, I've forsaken my love by doubting him in that moment. And it's this whole drama. But I think the drama, I've been trying to make sense of that drama, and I'm making a lot more sense of it now, where I feel like, the wisdom of that drama is, Warzameg has to learn how to see her, or how to see without relying on the externalization, the light on the outside. And it seems that ultimately he doubts her in the myth. And that's part of what the myth is about too. Thanks for going with me on that random journey. I've been trying to make sense of this weird little pinky on top of a tower for a long time, and the shining white hair is really helping me out.
It'd be great if you'd let us know at some point where, I don't know that story, so it'd be great if you'd let us know what it is and where it comes from. That would be lovely. So should I go on now, or?
Please, and I'll type that in.
Sophie, did you want to add something? No? Okay. All right, let's see here. Uh-oh. Let me do screen share.
I'll mention that you find these stories in the Nart sagas, or tales of the Narts, and we've had John Colaruso's come on and been a wonderful guest who translated that.
Oh, okay. Okay, are you seeing the right screen now? Are you seeing the
presenter view?
Oh, you're seeing presenter view. Okay, hold on. Oops. Okay. I'll try again. Okay. Are you seeing the presenter view or the slide?
Looks great.
Okay, thank you. I can't tell. All right. So you recall from last time, I talked about the fact that what's so unusual in this manuscript is that we're shown that around the base, something about the cultural attitudes that the king and queen are conditioning the situation that the king and queen find themselves in. And we saw that there's a a critique of Greek heroic ideals. And, you know, this doesn't depend on any kind of interpretation of esoteric or concrete alchemical symbolism or operations. This is the kind of story that you see in a medieval cathedral where biblical stories are shown in a series. And so we see this series of three images. The Greek heroic ideal of Hector and Achilles at the siege of Troy, these great warriors full of passion and emotion, and Achilles acting impulsively and sulking when he doesn't get his way, and causing a lot of sorrow because of that. But then we see Alexander, and he's a figure who doesn't just raid and destroy as the Greeks did with Troy. They weren't there just for a woman. It was a really rich area, and they wanted to take control of it, or not so much take control of it as an occupy, but get some of what they had. So there were other reasons, obviously. So anyway, so Alexander, though, he has this wish. He's a great warrior, so he's a kind of intermediate figure, but he doesn't just react. And so when this basilisk is seen across the river in this walled city, and his men are dying inexplicably, he talks to his advisors, he reflects on things, and comes up with a clever solution that doesn't involve a battle. And then we saw this final figure, which is so interesting, where the story of Alexander meeting up with Diogenes, and how these men were two opposites. Alexander the conqueror, the man of power, but also wisdom and learning. So he spreads not only suffering by going to war with people, but he does also bring the Greek version of civilization to them. And then Diogenes, who was completely renounced those kind of power impulses, and was actually a worshiper of Sibyl, the goddess, the mountain mother, the goddess of the earth's fertility, of caverns, mountains, and she wasn't the dominant cult in Greece, but she was, you can think of it like this kind of undercurrent of the old feminine that was rooted in people who really lived close to the earth. Now, I'll stop there because I'm going to go on to, let's see, how are we doing on time? I'm going to go on and then stop so we can be sure and get through things. So this is going on to a new painting, and it also has a base, but we're not going to look at the upper part of it. We're just going to focus on the base. And it's now become three-dimensional. And we see a scene there. And this scene, following, remember, the king and queen, and now we've seen the king and queen are going to have to do a lot of hard work to work through the problems that they've had, or that have developed out of this influence of patriarchal heroic culture. So here we see the biblical story from the book of Esther. And Esther was became the wife of the Persian king Ahasuerus. And in the story, his queen Vashti refused to obey him. He wanted her to come out to greet people and for them, some people, important people who were visiting him, and she refuses and embarrasses him. Is rude about it, and he divorces her, and he marries Esther, this beautiful Jewish woman, whose uncle has helped to bring her up and is a rabbi. And there's a Jewish community there, a big Jewish community, but there's always tensions there. And Esther has and she respects him. She shows respect for her husband, but not submission so much as proper respect and a valuing of him as well as of herself. And so she, there's a crisis because the king's advisor, Haman, wants to kill the Jews, wants to wipe them out. And so he's been offended by Mordecai, who's Esther's actually her cousin and her guardian. And so he gets permission to have the Jews killed. King says, okay, if they're causing that trouble. But Esther goes to him and she asks him not to have the Jews killed. And in this scene, what's really important is we see he hands her his scepter, the symbol of his royal power. So instead of his ordering that, and she wanted the Jews to be able to kill their enemies, but instead of his making the order, he gives her the scepter, and she is the one to decide. And and so the plan was reversed. So here you see this very different kind of relationship. Now, here's the frieze at the bottom of another painting. And now, we've gone from the king and queen, these kind of archetypal, large personality symbols, to an actual story that's in the Bible, possibly historical, of a king and queen. And now we go to a scene that's partly mythical because there's a satyr in it. But these are ordinary people. They're naked. They don't have any special vestments on. And on the left, we see that there's a woman at the base of a tree, and she's been lounging there with a satyr. And of course, the satyr is half animal, represents something very sensual, and a kind of sensuality and enjoyment of sex. And there's a man who's angered by this and has a club and is attacking them on the left. And then on the right, we see a different scene where now we see a man is restraining the man who wants to attack the satyr and the woman. This attack against physical sensuality and his being disturbed by it. So there's suddenly this restraint. And this is, if you think about I just go back here. In the Middle Ages, how the body was really thought to be not of value. Spirit was everything. Women were and still are in most of the world, maybe everywhere, subject to men. But particularly this kind of loathing of feminine and of feminine bodies. And Santa Clara became anorectic and couldn't get out of bed, trying to be holy. Here's the base of another scene. And here we see women comfortably naked, adorning themselves, sharing perfumes, bathing, how comfortable they are with their bodies. And I'm not going to show you the larger scene, but in the larger scene, they're men kind of looking at them. And, it's that curiosity that men have about women's bodies and women being in their bodies and the mystery of their bodies that I think is obviously so. It must just be a universal characteristic of our species. But here we see the women not like the saints of the Middle Ages, but women who are very comfortable with themselves. Now, moving along, and this is part of another image in the series. And I wanted to just focus on this one part because it shows a tree with golden roots. And the crown is now at the base of the tree. And Jung wrote, the secret is hidden not in the top, but in the roots of the tree. The roots extend into the inorganic realm, into the mineral kingdom. Think of alchemy here. In psychological terms, this would mean that the self has its roots in the body, indeed, in the body's chemical elements. So, again, this is the opposite of the idea that the body is to be overcome, that women are inferior to men and because they're somehow associated with body, and spirit being associated with masculine being superior to matter. And of course, here you get men and women, masculine and feminine are all mixed up. Although in the larger scheme of this manuscript, there's a lot of play about what is masculine, what is feminine. This marvelous. Here's another image. It's a saving grace, perhaps you might say. This one has alchemical illusions because this man who's coming out of the mire actually represents an alchemical process of making mercuric sulfide, which is cinnabar. And so what looks like a funny helmet on his head, you actually have to catch the distillate, the thing that comes off when the things are heated. That's the thing you have to catch. And so you can't, otherwise it just goes off into the air, the vapor, into vapor. And you see the alchemical color symbolism of the process, black, white, and there's a little bit of yellow there, but black, white, and red being the symbolic color sequence. But here, what you see is that this angel wearing a golden crown, not a silver crown, is handing something for him to cover his nakedness, something that is kind of an orangey red. And as if having gone into this dark depths, the spirit is now coming to greet him, but it's a feminine spirit that's coming to greet him, not a masculine spirit. And she has a seven-pointed star. So there's a kind of completion of all the seven planets that were known at that time. Look at her beautiful wings. She's just lovely. But it's a very compassionate scene. She's very calm and very gentle, and she's not horrified by how strange this man looks. I'm sorry, it's a six-pointed star, which I not a seven-pointed star. And of course, that represents the union of spirit and matter. So what I want to emphasize here is that the Splendor Solis is critical of an undifferentiated admiration for the Greek heroic ideal and patriarchal hierarchical attitudes. The paintings do value the intellectual contributions of Greek scholars who, among other things, investigated the natural world rather than accepting religious dogma. The paintings in the Splendor Solis portray the need to value lunar consciousness or things that are culturally feminine, but not in a one-sided way. In the Splendor Solis, we also see the inherent value of the culturally feminine qualities of relatedness and compassion for the other. We looked at one frieze that showed an attitude of protecting an actual woman who is with a satyr rather than attacking her for her sensuality. And Jung addressed the same one-sidedness. In her final public lecture, Marie-Louise von Franz focused on the importance Jung gave to differentiated relatedness and the importance he gave to meeting each patient with genuine reactions so that each hour was a personal encounter and not a treatment. Jung broke up the white, and this is a quote from von Franz, Jung broke up the white coat distance in which the doctor treats his patient as if he were an impersonal object. Von Franz believed that Jung's rehabilitation of eros, or differentiated relatedness, is not yet understood, but that he may be remembered as his greatest contribution. Now I'm going to go on just a little more and we can stop. And then after this time, I'll just have a few more slides to show you. Claire Douglas, I wanted to bring up the fact that I don't think Jung, it isn't like he had the ultimate consciousness about this by any means. And Claire Douglas, who's a serious scholar, and if you can ever get her to speak, she's quite wonderful. She edited Jung's vision seminars and also wrote a very important biography of Christiana Morgan, who was the patient that Jung was talking about in those very important seminars. I think they'd be a great thing for a reading group to read. So Claire Douglas in her introduction wrote this. She said, though it seems that during the analysis, Jung had been stirred by Morgan's quest and was shaken by the complexities of the transference and countertransference between them. During the seminar, Jung focused on only those aspects of his patient's materials that fit or stayed not too far afield from what he has already officially formulated as feminine. Using Morgan as a paradigmatic woman analysand, he spotlights her initial plethora of inner masculine, what he terms animus, images, as well as those visions where Morgan is involved in descents, sacrifices, and passive suffering. Yet, in these visions, Morgan engaged in assertive and aggressive activity that sometimes troubled her interpreter. He tended to describe this behavior as too strongly masculine. Thus, he neglects Morgan's greatest contribution, her depiction of a fully engendered woman reclaiming all the possibilities inherent in her psyche. This was a gift that Jung and his group of listeners were not yet ready to accept. We are left, therefore, with an incomplete rendition of Morgan's visions, and with a sense that Jung and the seminar members have accompanied Morgan only part way in her exploration of a feminine territory. So I'm going to stop there, and I just have a couple more points about what the relationship to the natural world. But why don't I just went through a chunk, so let's stop and talk.
Diane, you know, the thing that occurs to me, which is what Dennis said, that I think is what I tried to have in that verse in the Tao Te Ching, is that not only is the Splendor Solis alive, but the material world in which it was embedded is alive. The pagan culture that gave rise to this is pushing back against the rational world of solar consciousness that is about to take over the world and is really gaining a serious foothold in the world. So
Yes.
this is actually a treatise that is an act of rebellion, that the Splendor Solis is really about bringing forth lunar consciousness that with some teeth in it. It is not a passive sort of way that people are seeing the moon and lunar consciousness as reflected by solar consciousness, but they're embodying it with its own light and its own sense of wisdom.
Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to get across here. And that's a beautiful summation. Thank you.
Maybe what we could do is, you know, last week we had the good fortune of having Howard Teich in the audience. You know, Boris brought up the idea of lunar consciousness, that there was this, I'll say, an obscure unpublished article, and Howard happened to be there. Well, he's here again today. And perhaps we could invite Howard to say something about the lunar masculine, because that's an unusual contextual combination that many of us really don't have a full grasp of what lunar masculine actually means and how that relates to what we're talking about.
While you bring on Howard, I'll go back to where we started today with the Ibis and the baboon, which are, you know, symbols of Thoth, who's associated with the moon. So there's a, you know, Thoth is one of the great symbols of lunar masculinity, and of course is associated with alchemy, you know, as a central figure in alchemy.
Right. Well, and not only that, but of course he brought writing and culture, and the idea of going between worlds. And, you know, we are so bound to the world of things that experiments that can be replicated, the world of, you know, show me, and yet the world of the rational world is constructed, and things that are we can construct a world that gets in the way of our actually experiencing the world and being in the world. And so there's both being in the world in a different way with all of our being and our senses, and being in multiple aspects of and multiple realities. And if we don't, if we're not able to do that, we're only living a little bit of what it means to be alive.
Hey, Howard.
Howard.
Let's get you off mute. Hey, Howard, we still got you muted. Hey.
This is so unusual of a crossroads at so many parts of my life. And the parallel universe that I learned about the lunar masculine was a Mysterium Conjunctionis. The irony of at the latter part of Henderson's life, I actually wanted to share this twin hero story that I had come across from Campbell and him, where the two came to their father. And I had begun to realize that the hidden piece was the lunar masculine in their story, Child Born of the Water. And then in Mysterium Conjunctionis, you had those 4 pictures of men, two joining in 2 bodies. And they were very, I couldn't figure out what that meant. And then I noticed that the pictures actually were in color, of course, and the comments were there. So I did something really unusual for me. I colored them in, and I saw that they ended up, I think it was called The Hidden to Be Revealed of Alchemy was the lunar masculine. They were standing on 2 blue feet. And by that time, I had understood that blue and the Navajos and many indigenous cultures, that was the lunar masculine. And certainly Child Born of the Water and the twinning of this architecture of what turns out to be quantum as opposed to binary and complementary has a whole different implication in looking at all the different gender stuff, which is fascinating in hearing you and this beyond masterful understanding to see all the gender stuff that was going on then as is now, and in Mysterium Conjunctionis as its complement, coming from a different, almost a complementary world, but it's still ending up with the lunar being the hidden part. And I think that's the Renaissance that we're in, that all of us are talking about, is the birth of the solar feminine and the lunar masculine, complementary, as a conjunctio of the second alchemy conjunctio, because the first one is the minor one. And I think that weirdly, particularly these seminars, these last 2, which are like, it's like, how could this be ordered? And the lunar being so emphasized in your work and listening to, the amazement of this for me. So, it's like, wow. And I'm actually right now moving to Joshua Tree, which I am at for the first time in my life this week, into a yurt on my friend's property. And so I'm going to get to feel nature. And I was motivated by Jung's, of course, having nature. And I had the honor one time of hearing his daughter give a lecture on astrology out there with a group that Donald Sonder, which I imagine you knew, Dyane, had organized. And I was a friend with him, and all these people were there in Jung's house, hearing his daughter give astrology. And here we are at this era that the lunar and the solar come out without gender, but as primal archetypal energy.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Gosh, I mean, I'm just, Dyane, do you want to respond to that? I guess I won't make you. I mean, got so many thoughts. One of the places that I go with it that I've been thinking about a lot. Now, Dyane, if you have a response, please.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I'm building on what Howard said. I've been thinking a lot about Richard Tarnas's work, Passion of the Western Mind. And, what he's getting at is there's this trajectory of Western consciousness, and he articulates it. He's like, it's very much connected with asceticism, which is this whole, universal, not universal, but we find it all over the world, this tendency to associate the feminine with the material. The material is fallen, the soul or the spirit is what's pure, divine. And so this effort to, defeat the impure feminine body, in favor of the pure, divine, masculine reason or something like that. And he's kind of showing that there's this, the benefits of that masculine trajectory and some of the technologies and stuff like that. But his argument is he's saying it's not just a story, it's not just an ascent. the passion, what he means is that this whole narrative has always been destined, like any hero's journey or any individuation journey. If you have a young kid rising into their masculine, it's just setting them up for later integration into the feminine. And so this idea that we're going on this roller coaster ride as an entire, civilization, is something that's really fascinating to me. And what Howard was saying, connecting it with the quantum is fascinating as well, where we shift from this linear modality, this see everything as objective, isolated, separated, and that kind of thing. And then we shift in, is now all of a sudden synchronistically, I have no idea why all of a sudden I'm blending with my background. I'm one with the universe right now, I guess. But when we see through that perspective of everything as a particle, everything is isolated matter. And so, if the alchemists are all about redeeming the spirit and matter, you'd think that some of them might eventually realize what seems to be being said in these stories, which redeeming the spirit and matter is actually only redeeming our perspective of matter as something that has spirit in it. Which is something images. Anyway, thank you.
I went back in preparation for tonight and read the epilogue to the Mysterium and copied down some things that Jung had said that really resonated, Dyane, with what you were doing last time. And now I see what you're doing tonight. So this is on 556 that I'd like to read to you. This is Jung. Alchemy, therefore, has performed for me the great and invaluable service of providing material in which my experience would find sufficient room, and made it possible for me to describe the individuation process, at least in its essential aspects. And I love the way that he articulates how alchemy gave his experience room. I mean, it's really a spacious imagination that he ends the Mysterium with. And it seemed fitting to read that at this juncture.
Fabulous. I want to just pause there, that it's similar to your attitude with the images. It's not one of mastery or control or objectification or of analysis. It's neither analysis nor synthesis. It's a much more differentiated way of experiencing things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And he takes us on that journey through what that is like.
Yes.
I'm going to go back and finish up so that we can all feel that we've done it for today. Let's see here. I just lost you guys. Hold on. Can somebody else? No, I guess you can't do screen share. Sorry, I did the wrong button, so it'll take me a second. Share screen. All right. All right. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Just 3 more slides. So I wanted to end with our place in the world of nature and our relationship to the world of nature, which is not unrelated, of course, to what we've been talking about with the feminine. So intrinsic to this approach is a respect for the world of nature and the experience of oneself as a part of that world. This just seems so obvious, and yet apparently it's not. There are even hints that non-humans may be more aware of us than we recognize. Now here, I want to refer to von Franz's final public lecture again. And these are two images that are from something, one I showed you last time, the one with the white bird that I think might be an ibis. And it shows people, a man beating horses on the right there. And there are people beating people. And they're plowing. And then there's a woman who's kind of offering food to a pig so that a man can catch and slaughter them. And we see also the peasant rebellion. And of course, the soldiers who are fighting with the peasants are from their same class. They're doing it to get a job because they didn't have a place to be. So, it's so sad and futile, this kind of fighting and power, the power orientation of soldiers, armed soldiers fighting peasants. And I want to bring von Franz quotes something that Jung gave in a lecture when he was a student in Basel between the ages of 21 and 24, somewhere in there. He was in the Zofingia Society. And here's what he said. He said, in institutions which offer training in physiology, the moral judgment of students is deliberately impaired by their involvement in disgraceful, barbarous experiments, by a cruel torture of animals, which is a mockery of all human decency. Above all, in such institutions as these, I say, we must teach that no truth obtained by such means has the moral right to exist. And when I think about the waterboarding that happened and the cruel way that people treat animals, which is what von Franz was writing about, was the objectification in her final lecture, to do with the objectification of the natural world and the objectification of animals and of human beings, and how absolutely harmful that is. And I think I don't have to convince those of you in our audience. So here's that quote. Well, let me just go back here. This statement that Jung made, he had attacked materialism with its view of the world as concrete and observable, and with a devaluing of relatedness and a devaluing of the unconscious and the importance of it. Now, I want to show you that in the planet series of 7 planets, where there is a vessel in the middle and a planet god above and the earthly activities below, the final one is that they put the moon as the final one in the Splendor Solis. So the moon is the ruler now up above. And we see in the vessel now a human being, a young king with the trappings of his authority, but he's standing on the moon. The moon is above, and there's a mandorla around him, which doesn't represent the sun, but it's usually associated with light around a female saint. And in the activities below, we see a cooperation between people and animals. There's a dog sitting next to a man who's hunting. There's some hawks that are on someone else's arm. The stream of life is flowing. People are working in the fields, and they're working cooperatively, both with other human beings and with nature. And there are birds around. They're not afraid. The birds are around the swans and the ducks and the geese. So this is now our final scene. And this is a rather androgynous looking king, in fact. You know, he's not a Greek hero type. And he's looking out very clearly and alertly to the world. So I think the point here is that I wanted to just fold into this is the idea that that you've already so beautifully. I didn't really need to give the rest of the lecture. I think it comes out in the discussion, because I think, Dennis, looking at these pictures and talking about subject to subject, when we objectify, we injure ourselves and we injure others. Objectification is not the same thing as wisdom. It's not the same thing as perspective. And it is so overvalued, and it allows people to act out of power, a power principle rather than relatedness. And it is harmful to patients when they're objectified, if you're a therapist, but it's harmful to each other if we're objectifying each other. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. I finished. Thank you so much.
Dyane, this was absolutely beautiful. You bring life out of something that, as we look at it purely rationally, as we inhibit our ability to feel what is alive in the illustrations, in the paintings, and in the corresponding texts, you animate it. And to me, that's the gift of moving through awareness, through knowledge, and becoming and sitting at the foot of wisdom. If we ever think we're wise, we're not. And so whenever we are around somebody who seems to have brushed up against wisdom, it passes across us like a light creating shadow and moving across us, and we chase it. And to me, this has just been a beautiful. I'm so appreciative that there was this response the second time around to bring completion to something that seemed a little incomplete, but if we had only had one time, the first time, it would have been fine. You were brilliant then, you're brilliant now. And yeah, I just throw it back and let's have some parting shots from Will and Dennis and Sophie.
I just tell you one little thing.
Absolutely.
When you talk about brushing up against wisdom, I can't help but think of Joseph Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a remarkable man. And the first time I met him, he came to a seminar that I was attending, a small seminar that I had attended for a year. And I happened to be leaving, standing next to him. And here I was sort of like nervous and in awe of him. I'm so embarrassed to tell this story. And I looked at him and something made me blurt this out. I said, what was the most important thing you've ever learned or something like that? And he just looked at me and he said, he knew exactly. He said that wisdom comes from the earth. And then the traffic light changed and we both walked on. So.
Wow. You know, I wouldn't normally do this. In fact, I've never done it at another Myth Salon, but there's a second half to verse 71 of the Tao Te Ching. And I didn't read it because of brevity at the very beginning, but I thought I would take a moment and just read a few of the lines. Distance from the Tao engenders the disease that only oneness with the Tao can cure. Why pursue pieces when everything is one? The sage knows that to cure partiality, become impartial. Collapse distance from the Tao by revealing distance and its disease for what they are. Fictions, manifesting as illusions of separation that are incapable of interrupting the unity of the Tao. The mind breaks wholeness into parts. Identities result from attempts to individualize, creating edges and forming boundaries. Identities are constructions, fabrications, the carriers of the disease. The mind imagines identities to be real. In the end, to recapture oneness and heal divisions, the disease must be unlearned. In reality, there are no separations. All paths emanate from the Tao. There is only oneness. All else is fantasy. To understand the disease that comes from pursuing distance from the Tao, say that again. To understand the disease that comes from pursuing distance from the Tao, unlearn the disease. Awaken wholeness and healing through innocence and the Tao. So here we are. Now, Dyane, you and I talked about, you were scheduled for a third appearance with us, and you and I talked about possibly amending that. And in front of everybody, I'm gonna rescind that. And here's the reason. There are about 60 people already expecting to have another afternoon with you. And given that we have a couple weeks more to do this, your passion really was to come here and talk about weaving. And I plead guilty that I took you away from weaving and dropped you like a hot rock into the Splendor Solis.
Thank you. You got me right back in it. Yeah. You have provided me and the Myth Salon community with an immense piece of generosity and graciousness. I have told people that I have wanted to have a presentation on the Splendor Solis. And actually, I probably should give a debt of gratitude to Ron Schenk, who did this dance thing on the Splendor Solis. And I reached out to you and was able to, form an introduction and get you to come to that. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you're still willing, I would love to have you back. Okay.
In 2 weeks. Maybe you would just talk just a little bit about what you're going to talk about with Arachne and weaving and the web and what this is about.
Okay, this is actually a perfect extension of what we've come up to, because what I'll be talking about is this story of Athena and Arachne and their famous weaving contests, but bringing in the story behind the myth. And it's like an in situ, it's like a story of this patriarchal situation where the indigenous feminine is devalued, represented by Arachne. And I'm going to turn it around, going to talk about it, the history of it, the myth, but I'm going to turn it around. And I imagined the story from her point of view. And so I'm going to tell the story from her point of view. So it's ostensibly about weaving, but it's about the same theme, but getting down into storytelling.
I think it sounds fabulous. And I thought it sounded fabulous. I just had my own agenda, and I apologize for that. But, you know, what a wonderful set of talks you have given us. And let me put it back to Will. Will, would you say just something? I feel like I've said more than I've said in all of the Myth Salons, but Splendor Solis did it to me. Honestly, this is, you know.
Well, gosh, I mean, there's not a whole lot to add. I also am kind of very excited about the continuity between that I didn't expect or understand between these conversations about the feminine repressed and underserved feminine consciousness and how that'll carry into the next session. And you know, I think some of you guys know one of my mentors just came out with a book called Heroine of 1001 Faces, and I think that this is, you know, obviously incredibly important conversation for mythologists. So I mean, gosh, I'm really looking forward to it, and I just, you know, want to express my gratitude as well. And I think it's so cool to go from alchemy into weaving, two very tactile, craft oriented expressions of wisdom. So you know, I just want to say thank you, and I find it special, and I'm excited.
Well, Dyane, thank you again so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you all for being here.
I want to take us out, as I do, with just a moment of silence.